everybody and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all well and welcome to another True Crime Tuesday. This is a bit of a different one. It's the deadliest aviation incident ever in history. Almost 600 people died from these two planes colliding, and it's a bit of a mad story because it's a bit of a chain reaction, and it's like if one thing didn't happen then this entire thing would not have happened. And honestly, I find it crazy and no one's really heard of it as well, so I thought I'd do this case justice. And technically it was caused by a terrorist incident as well, so yeah, I'm just gonna get into it because it's a long one. This crash was the biggest aviation disaster in history. 583 people died, and that's a lot of people. Honestly, when I first heard about this, I was so confused. I was like, I've never heard of this case before. Like, it's not really a true crime case, but like it's so interesting and it's so important to learn about these sorts of things. So the story starts at Gran Canaria Airport, and it's the 27th of March 1977, and at 1:15 in the afternoon a bomb went off inside of a florist shop which was inside the airport. Now at 1 o'clock, so 15 minutes before the bomb went off, they did have a phone call warning them about the bomb. So this meant that no one died, 8 people were injured, 1 seriously, but it could have been a lot worse. And this group who phoned, they also claimed there was another bomb, so the airport decided to close because they didn't want to risk anyone getting hurt or dying. The group that were behind this incident were the Canary Islands Independent Movement, and their aims are basically to free the Canary Islands from Spain because Spain kind of owned them. And they've been inactive since 1979. Now, since this airport closed, that meant all flights heading to this airport had to be diverted. And the closest airport was Los Rodeos Airport, which is in Tenerife. A lot of flights had to be diverted to Los Rodeos, and one of these flights is the KLM flight, and this is one of the flights involved in the incident. KLM flight 4805 was just a normal charter flight from Holland International Travel Group. It had 248 people on board, 234 passengers and 14 crew members, and it originally departed from the Netherlands, more specifically Amsterdam. Now I'm going to butcher these names, so please excuse me butchering these names because they're obviously Netherlandy names. So please bear with me. Also, I'm going to look at my notes. So the captain was Jacob Veldhuizen van Zanten, who was 50 years old. First officer Klaus Myers, age 42. Flight engineer William Schroeder, age 48. And at the time of the accident, the captain, he was one of the senior people in this entire company. He was really high up in the company. And as well, he had something like 11,000 hours of flight time, and almost 2,000 of these were on this exact plane, so he had a lot of experience with it. Out of all of the passengers on the KLM plane, 52 were children, 4 were German, 2 were Australian and 2 were American, and then obviously the rest were mainly from the Netherlands. Another flight which was diverted was the Pan Am flight 1736, and this had originally departed from Los Angeles, but it had stopped over at JFK Airport in New York, where they got some extra passengers and they changed. So 14 people got on board at the JFK Airport, taking the total people on the plane up to 380. And please bear with me, I'm going to read from my notes because I can't remember all these names. So the new crew that boarded consisted of the captain, Victor Grubbs, age 56, first officer Robert Bragg, age 39, flight engineer George Warnes, age 46, and there was 13 flight attendants as well. First officer Bragg had almost 11,000 hours of flight time, and almost 3,000 of these were on the 1736, so again he had a lot of experience with this plane. August 2nd, 1970, in its first year of service, it got hijacked. No one was hurt or anything, but it was the first 474 to be hijacked, and honestly, maybe it was predicting some bad luck and that something bad would happen with this plane. So obviously the planes, they were told that they couldn't land in Gran Canaria Airport and were told to divert to Los Rodeos, and this was only about half an hour away, so it wasn't a massive deal. But Pan Am flight was mainly retired people, and most of them were going to the island to go and hop on a cruise, and they knew that they would have missed the cruise. So Pan Am flight asked if they could have a holding pattern, which basically meant kind of circling around the airport till they could land. But the airport said, no, you need to go to Los Rodeos because of like all the air traffic, so this is where they were diverted to. And they probably wouldn't have been able to do this anyway. They only had enough fuel to last them 2 hours in this holding position. Los Rodeos Airport, it was a small regional airport, and when I say small I mean really small. It only had one runway, one taxiway, and then it had like kind of 4 mini taxiways connecting the both. And it was a Sunday that this event happened, and because it was a Sunday they had less crew there, so in the control panel they only had 2 people, which you'll find out in a bit why 2 people working was just not a good idea, and it was a lot of stress on these 2. And like I said, it was a tiny airport and it did not have the capacity to hold all the planes that were being diverted to it, including 5 like large jumbo jets, including the KLM and Pan Am obviously. It did not have the space. The planes had to park on the taxiway, and the first plane to arrive out of the 2 involved in the incident was the KLM, and the people obviously got off the plane to wait like till they could leave again. But when the Pan Am arrived, there wasn't enough room in the airport for the people, so they had to wait on the plane. Once the bomb threat was contained at Gran Canaria Airport, they told Los Rodeos and said they could start sending the diverted planes back to the airport they were meant to go. And this was like 2 hours later. It was almost 4 PM, and obviously the planes, they were annoyed. They just wanted to get back as soon as possible. Now the KLM plane, obviously this was in front of the Pan Am because it arrived first, and the KLM captain, he decided to refuel at Los Rodeos instead of at Gran Canaria Airport just to save time, but this refueling took 35 minutes, and it meant that the Pan Am plane and the KLM could not take off because there was a refueling vehicle obviously to help refuel. They didn't have enough room for the Pan Am to go around the KLM. There was only about 12 meters of room, and that wasn't enough, so the Pan Am plane had to wait for the KLM. Once it refueled, it had to wait as well for the people to get back on, and there was a family of 4 that didn't get back on, and they had to be located and put back on the plane before the KLM could even move. Now obviously because most of the planes were parked on the taxiway, they couldn't take off like normal, so they had to do something called a back taxi, which basically meant they would travel along the runway. When they get to the end, they would do a 180-degree turn, and then they would build up speed and take off, going kind of the way that they came. So this is what the planes had to do, and the KLM was the first plane out of the KLM and the Pan Am to do this. So the KLM was told to just go to the end, and then once they did the turn, to obviously wait for permission to take off. And very shortly after the KLM had gone down the runway, the Pan Am was told to also go down the runway. The KLM was still on the runway as well, and they were told to take one of the exits off, one of the little taxiways. They were told to take the 3rd exit off to kind of circle back around. And the Pan Am crew they misheard at first, and they asked, you know, can you tell us which one again? And the person in the control panel said, the 3rd one, sir. 1, 2, 3. 3rd. Now it did not help matters that the weather was starting to get a lot worse at this point. So Los Rodeos Airport was not in a great place for the weather, because it was highly above sea level, and it was literally at some point higher than the clouds, which I was like, what? The airport is 633 meters above sea level, and in this region of the world the clouds are 600 meters above sea level, so like it was taller than the clouds, which meant it got very foggy very quickly, and it had lots of mountains around it as well, which did not help. It meant the fog could easily roll into the airport. So whenever the Pan Am plane started to taxi, it was obviously making sure it was keeping track of all the taxiways. They weren't marked or anything, so they were just having to manually count. And when they got to the 3rd one, basically the angle that the 3rd one was at, it would have been impossible for them to turn onto it. They would have had to do a 148-degree turn onto it, which is impossible for a plane like this. And then they would have to do another 148-degree turn to get back onto the runway, which was very impossible. So they decided to go down the 4th exit instead, which meant they would do a 35-degree turn. Now at this point the weather was getting a lot worse, and once the Pan Am had gone onto the runway, the visibility had gone down to 100 meters, which basically meant they could only see 100 meters in front of them, which is very dangerous for planes that obviously travel really fast. Like, they wouldn't have had much warning time if anything were to happen, which it did. By the time the Pan Am flight had reached the 3rd exit and just gone past it, the KLM flight had reached the end of the runway and done its turn. The KLM still had pretty decent visibility, but there was a really big cloud moving towards it quite quickly, so they were going to lose this visibility very soon. And the captain of the KLM actually started up the throttles and began to move when the rest of his team obviously said, you know, we have not been given permission to take off yet. So the KLM crew, they ask the control tower for permission to take off, and they're not given this permission, but they are told they can kind of start the routine checks, as there's some things you have to do before you take off to make sure everything's ready. And they were given the directions for the route to take to the airport in Gran Canaria, and they basically could not take off at this point. It was not explicitly said they could take off. The control panel could not see either of the planes at this point because the fog was that bad. So they gave them takeoff clearance but not permission to take off, which it's two different things and all pilots know the difference between them. Now, with these planes, there was a lot of confusion between kind of directions given, and this would have been cleared up in the next few directions to the planes, but because there was kind of a lot of interference, it was not cleared up. So the controller said to the KLM plane, don't take off basically, and they said to wait for permission to take off, but this was interrupted by another transmission from the Pan Am flight at the same time. And this transmission came through on the KLM plane as well, but it was kind of an inaudible sound, like an inaudible screech. So they didn't hear this, and the Pan Am flight said at the same time that they were still going down the taxiway. So if either of these would have been heard by the KLM flight, then the accident probably would not have happened. Since this airport was so small, it did not have any sort of ground radar, and because obviously the control panel could not see the planes because of the fog, and the planes could not see each other either, this made it very, very dangerous. The planes really should not have been taking off, but they wanted to get everyone out of there and back to Gran Canaria. So the KLM flight started its takeoff roll, and obviously the captain, he was sure of what he was doing, but a lot of the crew he was with were a bit should we really have taken off then? But they didn't really want to disrespect him, so they didn't say anything. The control panel said to the Pan Am flight to let them know when they were clear of the runway, and the Pan Am flight were we'll let you know when we're clear. This came through as well on the KLM one, and everyone in the cockpit was kind of are the Pan Am shot on the runway? The captain, this really annoys me, he said, oh yes, and then carried on. He didn't stop the plane. I just don't understand this. If you know someone's on there, why carry on? As the Pan Am plane was approaching exit 4, they suddenly noticed something. It was the KLM plane coming towards them at full speed, and the Pan Am people in the cockpit, they exclaimed, there he is. And the captain said, God damn, that son of a bitch is coming. And then the first officer was repeatedly heard saying, get out, get out, get out, get out. And they tried to do a really sharp left turn to go onto the grass, so they obviously didn't get hit. But it's such a big plane, they couldn't do this fast. And the KLM, like I said, was going at full takeoff speed. So it was coming towards them so fast that they couldn't really do it. Once the KLM plane realised, they did try to stop, but it didn't work. So what they did try to do instead was to take off, but they hadn't built up enough speed for this. So the end of the plane was dragging it on the floor, but the first part of it was kind of semi-flying, and this is where the crash happened. So they crashed into Pan Am plane's right side. And the KLM plane just continued to skid, obviously. Slid for almost 500 metres, and because they obviously had this refuelling, all the extra fuel immediately caught on fire, and the plane was engulfed in flames. And this meant that any survivors did not make it because the fire could not be put out for hours. It took ages to put this fire out. The Pan Am plane was also destroyed, but it wasn't in as bad condition as the KLM. The cockpit, the roof was taken off it, but everyone in the cockpit ended up surviving. Obviously the right side was totaled, but the left side was okay, and quite a few people actually survived. So 61 people out of the 380 people on this plane survived, and they all managed to get out of the plane kind of through holes and gaps and rips in the plane, and most of them actually got out onto the left wing, and they ended up jumping off. I can't imagine how traumatizing it would be to be involved in this crash. And a horrible part is, obviously they did not know that a crash had happened at the airport. So once they realised that there was a massive crash, they obviously called emergency services, but they didn't realise that 2 planes were involved. The KLM plane was the first to be found, so emergency services focused on that, and the Pan Am flight was left for ages, and all the survivors were left for ages, and who knows if other people could have survived if emergency services got to them sooner. And the Pan Am plane was so damaged that they couldn't like contact anyone either. They couldn't contact the control tower to let them know there'd been an incident. They literally just had to sit and wait for help to come. Near the airport, it was closed, so it was fully closed for 2 days while they kind of cleared up the wreckage, fixed the like runway and the taxiway, and they just wanted to make sure everything was as it should be. And they did have ground radar installed, but like obviously it's a little bit too late for that. And it took until the 3rd of April for the airport to fully be reopened again, and this kind of caused a lot of stress because it was the only airport in Tenerife at the time. And a little while later there was another one opened, a lot bigger one, but obviously like no one can really get in or out the island for a few days. And the company KLM, when they first heard about this, they were like, we'll get our best like captain to focus on this case. And the captain they chose was the captain who was in the plane, who obviously died. Like no one on that plane survived, and they didn't realise this, so they chose him to look at the crash and see what happened. Obviously everyone on the KLM plane died, but there was actually one survivor, but she was on the plane up until they got to Los Rodeos. But basically this girl, she was a tour guide. She lived on Los Rodeos, but they didn't do direct flights from Holland to Los Rodeos. So what she did was she got her plane to Gran Canaria, and then she was going to get a connecting plane the next day to Los Rodeos. She was kind of thinking, what's the point of me getting another plane back to Gran Canaria just to fly back to Tenerife the next day? So she did not get on the plane, and she was like obviously the sole survivor, so she wasn't involved in the crash but the only survivor of this plane accident. Because this was such a monumental thing to happen, a lot of countries got involved with the investigation. Spain, the Netherlands, America got involved, but the main investigation said that the causes of this crash were the fog getting a lot worse, and meaning that like stuff couldn't be seen, the Pan Am plane not going down the 3rd exit, general terminology used was not great. Obviously there was a kind of a language barrier, and as well the interruptions with the radio did not help because important messages were missed. The Dutch investigation actually said there was a few other factors, so there was a lot of stress on everyone involved, obviously because they wanted to get everyone back before they couldn't fly anymore because of the fog, and as well that the people in the control tower, they were listening to a football game at the same time and they could have been distracted by this. And the Dutch did not want to take responsibility at first, but at the end of the day it was the KLM captain who kind of ignored instructions and was not given the instructions to taxi and to fly, but he tried to anyway, so technically the accident was his kind of fault. And at first I didn't want to like claim responsibility, but after a while obviously they had to, and they had to pay out like compensation to the victims and families, and this was a lot of money, like a crazy amount of money. And it also didn't help that they got all this extra fuel, because the time taken to refuel meant the fog got so much worse. Like if they would have taken off 35 minutes earlier like they should have, then this probably wouldn't have happened, because like the fog was really like not that existent then. And as well the extra fuel meant the plane had extra weight, so maybe it would have been able to take off sooner, but because it had this extra weight it couldn't. And obviously this meant that the plane caught on fire so fast, and there could have been survivors. Some of the human factors were found that the KLM captain, he had not flown this like routine flight for almost 3 months, and this was kind of, I don't know, they put this down to like why this accident couldn't have happened, but I don't think this was really like a factor, because who could have predicted that like they'd have to go to Los Rodeos? And as well, no one wanted to contradict him because he was like such a high up person. But yeah, this is the end of this case. I find it so tragic. Almost 600 people lost their lives, and I've literally never seen anyone do this case on YouTube. And it was literally caused by chain, like it was a chain reaction, you know. If one thing didn't happen, then like this entire thing would not have happened. I don't know, it's a tricky one, because it's like, who could have predicted this? Like if one little thing didn't happen, then all these lives would still be around, you know. So many children died, so many people died, it's so sad. But yeah, I will see you in the next case. Bye guys.